On the road again. Our one night stay at Baines Baobab campsite. Great, loved it. Wish we had actually stayed 2 nights to get a full day there. It's very nice, very remote, felt like we were alone, and the landscape's beautiful as well. Sunset over the pans, it's great. Driving out today, quite easy. The pans have dried up quite a bit. There's a couple of areas where there's a bit of slush. We were cautious and just drove along the dry route around the edges of the pan generally. Don't want to make any rash decisions, try to be brave, get stuck. We know how that feels. So now we're on to Esalbe. Going to spend 2 nights there. We're on a river, maybe get a bit of fishing in, let's see how it goes. Feeling good, feeling rejuvenated. Had some issues with the center diff lock on the car. It's been going on its own. I initially thought it was just the light, but since we're going to go on tar road today, I decided to just check that out this morning. But indeed, yes, the center diff lock was on. Anyway, it drove backwards and forwards, it went off. We left, we started driving, went on again, went off again. It's been off now for a while, so hopefully we don't have a recurring issue with that. Otherwise, plain sailing, nice warm day, lots of puffy white clouds out. Hopefully it doesn't spell a big storm, but on the road, next destination. As expected, it was quite a drive from Baines Baobab to Nata. Took us a few hours. Road's bad in a few patches, so took us a few hours to get here. But we're here. We stopped off in Nata for some basic supplies and then came through to our campsite, which is Esalbe. Anyway, this is a kind of mixed, mostly backpackers and somewhat camping as well on the banks of the Nata River. We got here in the relatively late afternoon, but well in time to set up our rooftop tent. We're in the rooftop tent today. The tent you see behind me over here is actually one of the permanent tents on the site. There's a bit of an admin mix-up with our allocated campsite, so we're in a makeshift campsite at this point. Dinner's been very basic tonight, quick one, and hopefully now for a nice hot shower, and then we'll hit the sack. We're changing our plans slightly, get up as early as we can and go straight to Khama Rhino Sanctuary. We were expecting to stay here for 2 nights, but I think the camping setup's not ideal. We've arrived at Khama Rhino Sanctuary Park. This is one place where you're guaranteed to see rhino, especially on the pans over here. We don't film rhino for obvious reasons, but it's nice to drive around. It's an easy drive around here. Not a lot of people here generally as well. And besides the rhino, of course, there are other things to see like zebra and wildebeest and springbok. I believe there are no lions here. Stand to be corrected. There almost certainly are leopard, although we probably won't see them because the bush is quite thick. Anyway, had a good drive here. A couple of vet fences, did a shortcut as well over some dirt road which shaved off not a lot, maybe about 15 minutes of our trip altogether. But we always do the adventurous route if we can. And we've got in here just in time to get some sunset viewing. So we're busy driving around the park now, getting those last few minutes before the roads officially, or before the gate officially closes. We've got a campsite as well, fortunately, which wasn't quite booked. We were booked for tomorrow and they did have a campsite available and one extra one. So we were in luck. And as the sun sets on Khama Rhino Sanctuary Park, it's time to set up camp for the last time on our epic trip through Botswana. So, what's been good? The wildlife sightings have been great. It's interesting that coming here has been more expensive than most of our trips around Southern Africa, but correspondingly there are less people, less campsites, costs more to book a campsite, your fees to get into the parks costs a lot more, etc. But correspondingly there's, I think, an element of exclusivity. So it's not as crowded, it's a lot more quiet, so you kind of get what you pay for. All of the places that we visited have delivered on the wildlife. Starting with the Chobe, starting with Ihaha, then Savuti, and then into the Okavango Delta at Moremi. We saw big cats on all of those occasions. We heard them all the time. We heard them as Ngaipan, but didn't see them, and Kumaga as well, didn't see them, but we did hear them. But still, Kumaga, for example, really delivered. It was epic driving down the Buteti River, sitting at the hippo pools. It was a beautiful experience. What was difficult? A couple of things were difficult. I think the driving here is difficult. Everything takes longer to get to. Once you get off the main roads onto the sandy or dirt roads to the various national parks and campsites, those are long drives and it is a bit tiring. Driving on the main tar roads is also quite slow because the speed limit's up and down, and there's wildlife, etc. So it is a bit slow as well. Sometimes the roads are not great. They're generally pretty good, but sometimes they're not great. So that has been quite a tiring aspect of this trip. One of the things that has, I think, stuck out for me a bit is our interactions with people in Botswana have been somewhat different to the rest of Southern Africa. Generally, I think we find that people are very friendly and welcoming, and we haven't always easily had that connection here. I'd say a lot of the time we found people to be reserved or maybe even a bit defensive, which is kind of odd because it's not that way in Zimbabwe, it's not that way in Zambia, it's not that way in South Africa, it's not that way in Namibia. You know, one of the things I always say is it's important to greet because that's part of kind of our culture on this part of the planet. But surprisingly in Botswana, it hasn't quite been that way. It's been a little bit different. So that's a little bit of an odd feeling for me. However, it's a beautiful country and we've been to some fantastic places.
Okay. The man.
You have diesel?
Yes, we have, but we are still changing the shift.
Is it?
Can just wait for 5 minutes.
That's fine. So it's taken a while to kind of get used to that interaction. I'm used to greeting people and going through the whole set of hello, how are you, I'm fine, how are you, etc. And obviously doing it in Setswana as well here in Botswana, but still kind of a curt interaction on many occasions. People do warm up though after a couple of backwards and forwards and so on, but not all the time. One of the things that I think we've done very well here is planned longer stays at all of the places that we've been to. And that's been good for two reasons. Firstly, because it is a bit of effort to get to each place, even if the distances are not long. It's often the drive itself is a bit of effort. And then just sitting there for a longer period of time, I think you get not just a greater appreciation for the place, but you also get to relax. And so that's a key element of overlanding through Botswana. That's a lesson I think that we've learned. Fortunately, we've learned it in a good way, and I think anybody who's planning a trip here should take that into consideration as well. This is not the type of place where you should be rushing from one spot to another, spending one night here and one night there. I think it won't be as pleasant an experience, and you won't get the full benefit of it. Supplies, not so easy to get here. Not a lot of large or significant towns, and I suppose that's representative of Botswana. It has a small population for what is a relatively large country, population to country size wise. So it has been a bit difficult to get supplies. The major centers like Maun and Kasane, you can get stuff, but in the smaller towns, not so easily. The weather has been very good to us. We've had very little rain. I think we got here just the right time in the year, just before the real significant rains begin. And that's good as well, because it means that we've had quite dense wildlife around the watering areas, or areas where water is available. So that's another important thing. And I think we learned that specifically from the Zimbabwe trip as well, where we were traveling around in a time when it was raining, and so it was difficult to see wildlife, even though we were in places where we should have seen a lot more wildlife. So Ngaipan is a really good example of that. It rained the day that we arrived, and we drove into a flooded campsite or camping area. Fortunately, our campsite wasn't flooded, and the wildlife pretty much disappeared. The next day we did see some wildlife, but very little in comparison to what we had heard and what we were potentially expecting. But that's luck of the draw, and it's just the time of year that we got here, and it so happened that we drove into Ngaipan on the day that it was raining. Of course, the rain is not predictable, the weather's not predictable, climate change is the thing as well. And when we came here to Botswana a couple of years ago and drove the Makgadikgadi pans, it was exactly this time of year, and the pans were completely flooded. So it's luck of the draw. We're here at a time that suits us, and we have real world constraints that kind of dictate when we can do significant trips like this. Something that's really interesting is that in all of our big trips, we always have this kind of wow factor. And with this trip, we struggled a bit to get that. We didn't get it immediately from the start, and it didn't linger through the trip. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the Botswana landscape, as we've experienced it now, is fairly uniform. It's kind of flat most of the way, and you're either in Mopani woodland or in acacia woodland, and it's all relatively sandy and so on. And so it's very different to what we're used to. When we did the Zimbabwe trip, we were in the mountains, we were in the Zambezi Valley, we were on the lake, we were on the river, we were at Matobo, we were in Hwange. It was all very different and varying. And it's the same thing in South Africa when we did the Northern Cape. It's all very different and varying. There's beautiful vistas, etc. And I think we didn't have that in Botswana. What we did have here, which I think we haven't had elsewhere, is an amazing variety of wildlife that was always there, always accessible, and we had some great sightings. I mean, this is probably the first time we're going to every single camp we've heard lions, and we've seen lions at almost every single place we've been. So in that respect, it really did deliver. A couple of important lessons. I think if we have to go back to Moremi, for example, we'll go directly to Third Bridge. That is basically the area to be. That's where all the wildlife is that's visible. And I think, you know, staying at Southgate and Northgate it's nice to break up the trip, but definitely we would go straight to Third Bridge and spend a lot more time there. Having to buy all your supplies in Botswana is a bit tough, but that's what it is. That's what it is. That is kind of the legislation. You can't bring stuff in here and you've got to make do with what's available to you. So that's something important to think about when you're planning your trip here. Also really important to take note of the vet fences, because you can lose your meat. It can be confiscated, so know which direction you're going in, and that you can travel north and west, for example, with meat, but you can't travel in the opposite directions. And you've got to plan accordingly and set out where you're going to get supplies and so on. So that is another thing that makes traveling through Botswana a little bit difficult, is having to manage your meat and also having to get supplies that are usually easily accessible elsewhere where there are larger populations. But as usual, it's been a great trip, an epic trip. Absolutely glad we've done it. Absolutely enjoyed it. Looking forward to heading back to Joburg tomorrow. It's going to be a long drive and going through the border again. This time I've got my passport, so it should be easy. And looking forward to seeing our four-legged family when we get home. Yeah, it's been a good trip, and hope you've enjoyed it with us. So cheers to another epic trip in wildest Africa, and glad to be here, glad to be on this continent.
Hey, buddy. Ah!